Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and Kezia Dugdale, Director of the John Smith Centre at the University of Glasgow. Welcome to both of you, with us from now until just before midnight. As ever, let's check out the front pages first of all. And the Times is leading on the planned Gaza protest march this weekend. The headline, Police Resist Calls to Ban the March. The Guardian also leading with that. The headline says, Defiant Met Chief rejects Minister's calls to ban the pro-Palestinian march. And the Daily Mail's headline is, Pray they don't end up with a riot at the Cenotaph. The Telegraph tomorrow is leading with a story from Gaza. The headline, Hamas fighters last stand at hospital. The Metro leading with the headline, The King's Speech, a historic day, yet Sunak plans just more of the same. The iFront page reads, Braverman split with Number 10 on tense as Tories accuse her of a leadership bid. The Financial Times front pages covers Britain's accounting watchdog scrapping plans for a full-scale overhaul of boardroom rules. King's Speech pictured at the top, as you can see. Pop band Girls Aloud feature on the front page of The Sun. It says Girls Again. Band reunites with a single dedicated to Sarah. And the Daily Express leads with the headline, Sunak accuses Starmer of a plot to lock UK in an EU deal. Well, the Star, the headline, Carrots turned me into an Oompa Loompa. A story about carrots giving one vegetarian a natural suntan. Anyway, don't laugh, sorry. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. I'm genuinely embarrassed about wearing orange at the moment, but there we are. OK, King's Speech, quick verdict from both of you. Kezia, you go first. We can see the Metro, the King's Speech. Do you, agree with that sentiment?
Well, it is a bit of a non-event. So 21 bills announced by the King. That's the lowest number of bills we've had in the best part of a decade. 7 of them are recycled, things that the Parliament hasn't yet managed to finish that are being brought back. Last speech, or the last effort perhaps from Sunak before the next election. It might be the last one ever as well.
Well, the last King's Speech ever.
The last
News.
Sunak.
Yeah, wait till you see how the FT's
you
put it.
heard it here first.
Yeah, OK, Henry, your thoughts?
I mean, I agree. It's remarkable, really. The government is considerably a long way behind in the polls. It has a year to go. Rishi was bigging it up. He was like, what could a nation do in 52 weeks? That was in one of his videos that he released a couple of weeks ago. And the answer is, not all that much. There's some decent stuff in there. I think the oil and gas thing will play well with a lot of Conservative voters and is good for some of our industry. But one of the things is a crackdown on pedicabs. Right? Of the very low number of bills, including the recycled bills.
What do you call a pedicab?
Well, it's one of those. Precisely one of those tourist traps with the
Tourists love it, don't they? Flashy lights, bit of fluff.
They do until they have to pay. But it's just remarkable that you've got a year to go. You need to desperately try and persuade the country that actually they should give the Conservatives a 5th term in office, which even if everything else hadn't happened would be a difficult ask, right? Historically speaking, and instead we've got this very, very cautious, quite technocratic King's Speech. It's baffling.
There's another way to look at it. On the one hand, yes, it's boring and a bit predictable in that sense, but also it could be viewed as quite smart by Rishi Sunak because it will keep his detractors at bay. It's a very sort of calm set of measures that there'll be very few opponents to. Labour have already said that there's several of these bills they'll back, particularly around ensuring that major venues have terrorism plans in place. It's called Martin's Law, for example. These are small but important changes to the groups that have campaigned for them, but it will keep the drama out of the House of Commons and away from Sunak's front door. And that's what he needs right now, is a bit of stability if he's going to have a good final few months in office.
I mean, I'm not a good final few months. Yeah, if that's how he's taking it, if he's just trying to have a quiet final year, then maybe. I'm not sure I agree broadly because, one, Martin's Law is a bad law. I'm sorry, I know it means a lot to the campaigners, but it is imposing a huge amount of additional restrictions on small and medium-sized venues that they can't really deal with, and we're already seeing the impact of that on the night economy. But that aside, before I go down my clubbing rabbit hole, Rishi Sunak needs dividing lines with Labour, right, ahead of the election, because if Rishi Sunak and Labour broadly agree on everything, the public like Labour more. Right, Labour are 10 to 15 points ahead in the polls. Starmer is not polling amazingly, but he's polling better than the Prime Minister is. The Prime Minister needs to find, if he wants to win the next election, he needs to find some issues in which he and Labour are on different sides, they matter, and the public back the Conservatives. And that's not what we've seen in this speech. And if he were being more political, That's what I would maybe have expected him to do, to find some issues. They would have been political wedge issues, and there's always a bit of cynicism about that, but it would have been explicable. Whereas, as you say, a year of getting on with Labour in the House of Commons doesn't make sense.
Do you think he's already done that by, for example, shunting some of the green energy demands on, the public down the road a bit? Isn't that a bit of a dividing line with Labour and stuff?
It's a bit of
but
one.
That's already been done.
But he's got a year to go, right? I mean, if you do that
How would you sum it up? I'm sensing an under-ambitious bit.
Yeah, I actually genuinely baffling, because Downing Street appear to believe they can win the next election, but I don't see how this King's speech is going to contribute to that effort in any meaningful way.
Let's take a look at the FT as well. It uses that word final. Sunak's final plans are set out. Who knows if it's final? Final before the election is what they're actually saying. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, Kezia, said that one former cabinet minister said to her that Sunak is managing the economy, not leading it. Is there a sense of a lack of leadership here, do you think? Or what did he hope this would deliver? You've given more support to it than Henry has at the moment.
Well, I don't know about that. But I think what I'm concluding is that Rishi Sunak doesn't think he's going to legislate his way to a win at the next general election.
So where will the heart and the soul bit come from it then?
Frankly, nothing but the economy matters in this, and that's why he's so steadfastly focused upon that. He's got his goals around reducing inflation, trying to increase living standards, make people feel a bit better about the economy more generally than they have until this point. I think that's setting himself a very tall order to pass, because all the signs are that he's not going to reach those goals, and that only really plays to Labour's favour.
So this is one of those standout moments in the autumn, but the next standout moment is the autumn statement. Now, would there be a bit more wriggle room, do you think, when we see Jeremy Hunt, take to the floor? And what could be offered at that point that might excite the voters a bit more?
I mean, it's a fascinating question. There's really two ways you can go with it, if there is any wriggle room or fiscal headroom or whatever they end up calling it. Is one, Tory MPs demanding tax cuts. We had that again in this morning's papers. Backbench Tory MPs demanding tax cuts.
Same papers always ask for it, mind you.
Yeah, precisely. And then the other hand, you've got giveaways, right? And you could try, and if you're being political again, you would target those as hard as possible. I actually think the interesting thing is, because you're right, the economy and the cost of living is the thing that will decide the election ultimately. But there was no real mention, if you think back to Rishi Sunak's speech in Manchester, there was no real mention of the cost of living crisis in that speech, right? And again, if you look at this King's speech, there's not all that many bills or measures aimed at the cost of living. Now, it might be that that's all being saved for the autumn statement, and we will get something big on things like childcare, energy. And if that's where the focus is going, that could make more sense, because the argument is we've got a year to go, we're not going to do it with bills, but we have to see.
Quick final one before we move on. Yes, do you agree? Is that, something like childcare or, income tax banding, for example? A lot of people feel aggrieved that they're paying higher rates of tax and they feel like they're not earning that much money.
So I feel like Jeremy Hunt's made it quite clear that tax cuts aren't on the table, but that doesn't mean that there aren't more rabbits to be pulled out of the hat. We've seen figures to suggest that there is more fiscal headroom than had otherwise been predicted. What you can be sure of is that those announcements, the spending commitments that flow from that, will be made much closer to the election than they are this Christmas.
OK, fascinating. We'll wait and see what happens. In the meantime, it's a sign of this is a part of the King's speech that it hasn't made so many front pages. But let's take a look at the Daily Mail. Pretty provocative front page from them, has to be said. Pray they don't end up with a riot at the Cenotaph. Well, the demonstration that the paper's talking about in London doesn't go anywhere near the Cenotaph, does it? And it starts, a couple of hours after the moment of Armistice Day, the 11th.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty sensationalist headline from the Daily Mail. I mean, who'd have thought it? But it's a fairly sensationalist headline. But there has been consistent worry about disruption, not just to the specific ceremony at the Cenotaph, which will be policed to within an inch of its life, right? But broader disruption to Armistice Day. You've seen pictures in the papers over the last few days of, poppy sellers and veterans and so on getting caught up in the middle of some of these protests, and absolutely nobody likes that. So I think that and there has perhaps been pressure from various quarters, including the Home Secretary, to not allow protests to go ahead this weekend. Now that we hear from the Chief of the Metropolitan Police is not they don't think that the threshold has been met for that.
Yeah, that's the front of the Guardian.
That's the front, which we'll get. Which we'll get to. And but for the Chief of Police, it's now on the line for him, because he said he'll do whatever it takes to stop disruption. But if there is serious disruption, not at the Cenotaph, but on Armistice Day, and if that becomes the story instead of remembrance, that is going to, I think, amp up pressure, not least from elements of the government, but there will amp up public expectation as well, that a tougher line is taken on some of these demonstrations in future. It's
a very interesting dividing line, this, isn't it? Because many people are suggesting that the world wars part of which are being commemorated on Saturday and Sunday, were fought for free speech and freedom. And these marches are an element of free speech, which in this country is a democracy we hold so dear. And it's not fair of the government to ask the Met to cancel or ban a march when there are very strict protocols about when that can actually happen.
Yes, you can't just ban a march because you don't like what people are marching for. That's why the threshold in the Public Order Act is as high as it is. And that's why we've had the Commissioner on the TV channels tonight saying, actually, if there was a serious threat backed by evidence, then he would ask for that power to be used to bring the march to a halt. But he just doesn't have the evidence of that on his desk this far, or thus yet. And that's why he's going to allow it to proceed. And he's not asking the Home Secretary to use that particular power. It's clearly exceptionally difficult, but one of the things I found really interesting about this story is the Police Commissioner describing the full range and spectrum of people that will be taken to the streets. Yes, there will be some people who are setting out to cause trouble, but that does not represent the vast majority of people who are going out to express exactly how they feel about what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, and that should be respected.
We'll come on to Brodman in just a moment. Very quickly, hate marches, do you agree with her?
Brodman uses an awful lot of very clumsy language, and I think this is one of them. There are fringe elements at these marches who are seriously problematic and that we should be doing more to deal with, the jihad speakers being the obvious example. It's not fair to tar all demonstrators with that brush. I think the broader question is raised, though. The organisers of these demonstrations say that they're going to organise them every week, and I think there is actually a public nuisance balance argument to strike about, OK, the right to protest is important, but bringing stations in central London to a halt every week, I don't think that's on.
Well, we can see the Times with the two stories we've talked about already, the King's Speech, and there we are at the bottom, police resist calls to ban that march we've discussed. Plenty more still to come in the next part of our show. The Express claims Sir Keir Starmer wants to lock the UK into an EU deal. Discussing that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the Press Preview. Joining me once again, Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and Kezia Dugdale, Director of the John Smith Centre at the University of Glasgow. Welcome back to both of you. In a sense, we've already touched on Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, and the allegation of hate marches. This is a separate row, effectively, isn't it, in the eye. Braverman split with Number 10 on this issue of tents, tent cities, homelessness, whether it's a lifestyle choice, and this accusation now that this is simply for her a leadership bid, Henry.
Yeah, it's deeply dispiriting in many ways, this story, because there is, in theory, on paper, a way that you can make the case that the Home Secretary is making, which is that in the context of the government creating a comprehensive shelter system, which the government is aiming to do, £2 billion over 3 years, then when you've got a shelter for everyone, if you do have people who are refusing to go into shelters and therefore, in a sense, voluntarily choosing to be on the streets, that's a completely different issue, right? And there's issues, and therefore some kind of crackdown on that on public nuisance grounds, on the grounds that many of them will be trying to evade the authorities. That's fine. But the strange thing is that the only way in which that is justifiable and makes sense is if you've delivered a comprehensive anti-homelessness programme. And if you've delivered a comprehensive anti-homelessness programme, that's an amazing story, and that's what you should be talking about. I don't know whether it's just the fact that she's Home Secretary and the Home Office does this to people, because in the Home Office you're always having to deal with policing, immigration, law enforcement, all of the negative stories. But it's just very strange that she's gone with this particular angle, especially because, with the best will in the world, we're never going to end up with American-style tent cities, because America has almost no safety net. It's a very big country, and it has very high internal mobility. So what you do get, and you do have horrible tent cities in some American cities, but that's people from half of a continent kind of congregating in a few big cities. That's not going to happen here.
Yeah, I'm going to move on, if you don't mind, to another point of divide, if you like, which is the front page of the Express and the inside pages too. They suggest, here we go, Rishi Sunak warns Labour would ditch our Brexit freedoms and shackle the UK to a fresh EU deal. He said Keir Starmer would reverse progress made and laying the groundwork for a general election. Then it goes on to say the Prime Minister put law and order at the heart of yesterday's King's Speech. And we can't find anything else in the inside pages, which is a full side, which is where he outlines what Sir Keir Starmer would do. Anyway, nonetheless, it's made the front page, trying to find dividing lines that possibly aren't there in the King's Speech, but actually Brexit and how Labour tackle the after effects of it will be a dividing line, won't they, in the general election?
Yes, but, imagine the Daily Express managing to find a pro-Brexit angle on the King's Speech story in general. I mean, they deserve some plaudits for that alone. That is a key dividing line, though, for the particular voters that read this newspaper. They want to believe that if Labour win the next general election, that they will do as much as they possibly can in government to align with the European Union, and in so doing, by sticking with regulations that the rest of the EU is using, we won't be able to use the so-called Brexit freedoms that the Tories have sought to capitalise on in recent times. But in a way, you've just spelled out the problem here. Rishi Sunak had one line referencing this in the speech and wasn't really able to back it up with examples of what Brexit has done to liberate all these extra freedoms that he's going to put into action. It's a bit of a non-story, but it's one that suits the Daily Express very well indeed. Yeah,
fascinating. And you go back to what will win the next election, and I suppose your answer to the economy might just be it. Oh, that leaves you with the Sun, Henry. Girls Again, band will reunite with a single dedicated to Sarah Harding, who died of cancer in 2021 at the age of 39. Is that good for you?
I'm not going to lie. I have no idea about any of the contents of this story. I think
I can help you.
Maybe I think I've heard maybe one Girls Aloud song in my entire life. I'm sure it's great for that. But I do think it's significant. The Sun is one of the big pro-Conservative papers.
Yeah.
Right. One of their big press supporters. Nothing about the King's Speech.
No.
Oh, sorry, have I missed?
He plots vape tax at the top.
There we go. Well, I mean, that doesn't sound particularly pro. But even then, like, it's, as you say, one of the big political events of the year, right? It's got all the pomp, all the spectacle. The government is laying out. There's so many angles. If you want to create a front page, look what the Express did. If you want to create a front page, you can. But no, they haven't.
I'm going to get Kezia to do that next time. Anyway, we'll see you later. Kezia and Henry, thank you very much indeed. Here's the